Alrighty, let's get started. I'm going to speak a bit slowly while folks start streaming through. Really excited about talking to John. We're going to be talking about how to dance with uncertainty. And look, uncertainty has really got to be one of my favorite topics in business, in life, in product. So I'm really excited to be talking with John. I'm Scott. I'm the CEO and founder of Terem. I've been involved in over 60 product launches. Love product. Also love making sausages. Really love chatting to folks like John that are experts in product. Spend a lot of time with product teams of all shapes and sizes, and that's what this webinar series is about. Really looking forward to talking with John now. John, are you ready to join us?
Yep.
I
am. Do you hear me? Are we good?
Yeah, all good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to John. I'm going to let John introduce himself, and then John's going to take you through really a bit of an overview of uncertainty in product, some stories, and then we're going to get into some lessons learned, a bit of a discussion, a bit of Q&A. And I'm going to take the slides away, so we're just going to have a good chat. John, over to you.
Great. Hopefully everyone can see me. Good here.
Yeah, we're all good.
You got a panda? Kids' stuffed animals are there watching me, keeping ahead of me. But yeah, I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. Big thanks to Scott and Lily and Camilla for setting this up. Just a bit of information about me. I have a background in product management and UX research, and actually a bit of music before all of this. I was telling Scott this before we jumped on. I work at Amplitude. We help teams be more data informed, to make better decisions, to run hopefully more effective experiments. And most recently, we're letting people personalize their products for different audiences, and that's an exciting extension for us as a product. The company is based in San Francisco, but we have offices actually now most places in the world, so that's pretty exciting. A bit about my role. I get to chat with teams from around the world, from different industries. I kind of like to joke that these are from two people in a bedroom working on their latest startup to many thousand person product organizations. I work as a coach. You could think like for prospects, for current customers, hopefully future customers. And I help them figure out Amplitude, the product, help them figure that out to be more effective with our product, but also to work more effectively in general. So, I say it's a dream job. I'm a big product nerd. I like to write about this all the time on Twitter and everything. So dream job. I get to talk with a lot of people about product, and that's a bit about me.
And John, I think I've liked every one of your tweets. I gave up liking them and have just decided to just send them all to must read. Because
I was like, what's that guy doing? I mean, he's like really creeping me out now.
Yeah, I'm a #1 internet stalker.
Yeah, I mean, ever since I have a 3-year-old now, but the pandemic and the 3-year-old, I have the attention span to think in approximately 280 characters. So that sort of does that. That's where my cap is at this point, to do that. Yeah. Okay. That's so, today we're going to talk about uncertainty and how to, what I call, dance with uncertainty. Because in product work, I really believe we're surrounded by uncertainty and you really can't escape it. So, I tell teams that you don't actually want to escape it because it's where there's uncertainty is where we often find these big opportunities. If everything was extremely cut and dry, extremely certain, then everyone would have solved the problems already and you probably wouldn't have growing products, but they haven't, and that's good. So it's why we have opportunities to win new customers, create new products, disrupt the legacy players. And I always try to remind people, it's also about solving old problems in new and interesting ways. If you work in a kind of what you would call a traditional business, and you think it's all buttoned up. I mean, we see many examples of that being flipped on its head now.
I was going to say certainty, like, is almost an illusion, because there's uncertainty with certainty. You just haven't articulated it yet.
And even for those companies, it's like, you know, the human needs are pretty consistent over the centuries and decades. How you solve those problems can change, you know, so the new way of solving it can change. So, you know, when I think about it, to flip it around, often uncertainty is a good sign that it might be better to just, so let's say you have certainty, it might be a good sign that it's just better to buy a solution to solve the problem for you, right? So certainty actually points to maybe just a commodity product. And I always ask teams at that point, you know, is this the most important thing you could be spending time on if it's truly certain? So I think it's a dance, because we have to walk this very fine line. Realistically, too much uncertainty can make it incredibly hard to get anything done. It feels unsettling. It feels scary. It feels risky. Teams and organizations can get absolutely stuck. So that's one hand. But if we only work on things with known solutions, or maybe artificially reduce uncertainty, pretend uncertainty doesn't exist, you know, we find that that's not as effective. That doesn't work either. Let me give an example of that, just so we can be talking about the same thing. You know, the classic example is a senior leader wants a 6-month roadmap. She wants to know when the team will deliver, what the team will deliver over the next months. She wants to know what the features will look like, how they'll work. And so if you've been in that situation, you know what happens. You know, the team does these detailed mock-ups. They're extremely careful estimates. They break down the work into all these small pieces. They plan everything out because the leader wants that certainty. But what she wants, actually, if you put it another way, she wants the team to artificially reduce uncertainty. And so what happens in that case, in many cases, if you work in that environment, is that outcomes will suffer, right? They miss opportunities to change course. They miss pursuing different options as a team. But it's very important to note that the opposite can be true, right? I think we can all relate to these situations where our team is just going in circles, when it seems like just when we've decided on a direction, we expose even more questions. We go back to the drawing board. And I like to think of this as decision drift. And it can be incredibly demoralizing for a team. You think you agree, but you don't. You try again, you don't agree. And what happens in that case is the team becomes even more and more afraid to commit to anything, to commit to any particular direction, especially when it's difficult to reverse their decision. And so if this goes on long enough, if you let uncertainty stick around for too long, everyone burns out. And instead of, you know, certainty winning, now uncertainty wins. So I want to make that point really clear here, that it's easy to say, embrace uncertainty. But if you're a product manager, you're always dancing with uncertainty, right? Because we've all been in that spot where you can get spun around in circles as a team, experience decision drift experience. And I think this is kind of what we're up against as product managers. And it's not a simple problem. What makes it even more complex is it very much depends on the audience who we're communicating with, their past experiences, their product development experiences, what they've seen work and not work. You know, for the folks, you might have folks on the call who are experienced product folks. You might be 100% okay with the idea of not knowing and making this incremental improvement. You know, a lockdown roadmap to you is anathema. It feels very, very uncomfortable. You feel like you don't want to work there anymore. I don't want to work there if it's going to be like that, because it feels wrong, right? It feels like that's not what you're doing. And so the point there is it just feels uncomfortable to you, right? Now you need to think, because it might feel uncomfortable to other people too, when you're doing that. You're also probably thinking, like, how can we plan that far in advance? You're blacking me into a corner, but take a different group of people. And the idea that you wouldn't have an annual plan feels terrible. It's an unacceptable level of uncertainty. That's not a plan. That's not a strategy. So I'm just pointing out there how you can have these different groups of people.
And in a listed company or a VC-backed company,
yeah,
you need to communicate to the market. You know, you can't You can't show up
Exactly.
unless you got the good fortune of being Jeff Bezos. You can't show up and just say, "We're going to do what we're going to do. It'll be good."
It's the analogy that I use is, you go to your favorite restaurant, and that's when you say to the chef, "Surprise me." But you don't go to most restaurants and say, "Surprise me." You know what I mean, Scott? Like it's different. But I think that this is the super skill of product that we're going to talk about, because you can go to the market and embrace uncertainty and communicate to the market that there is incredibly valuable opportunity on the horizon. You don't have a solution about it right now. And you're working to improve it. And the market might respond very positively. It certainly does to a lot of venture-backed startups. You get those particular ideas. I think the important thing is you kind of get the idea, right? This isn't easy. It's a complex problem, but one that we can work with. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to explore, Scott's going to jump in occasionally. I'm going to explore these tactics for talking about uncertainty with your team members, your leaders, and your customers specifically. And what I'll do is I'll start with a story. So for a very long time in companies, I would use the word experiment all the time. Let's run experiments. What's your hypothesis? So you get the idea. So I remember talking one day with the CEO. This was at an old job of mine. And I was talking about running experiments. And he looked at me right in the eyes and said something I'll never really forget. He said, "Okay, I get it. I get you want to run experiments, but when will the real work start?" So here I was very excited. I was very green. I was very excited about lean startup. I was very excited about taking this very scientific approach to product. And here was this business person, a very, very talented strategist, a great leader in the company. And my scientific framing just wasn't working. And so at the time, this was very, very puzzling. I was confused. So why wouldn't he want to do experiments? Doesn't everyone want to experiment? Experiments help you learn. Experiments, everyone wants to learn, right? So it turns out, though, that business people live and breathe risk and taking risks. But if they haven't observed successful experimentation in product, teams may be learning and pivoting, producing great outcomes for the business. They might not get it. So if you said, "Hey, do you want to experiment with your sales pitch?" Conversely, they would completely understand it. Of course, we should experiment with our sales pitch. What salesperson would never experiment with their pitch? So I tried something different in that environment. What happened was, I thought was very interesting. So I changed my language and used the word bet. Now, you would think that bet would have all the same problems. So what do you mean we're betting? But it didn't. And I actually have some theories about that will help this discussion about uncertainty. So bets convey risk. Our bet might pay off, it might not. There's safe bets, there's risky bets, there are bets that let us kind of change the bet after observing the game in action. We can start small, we can quit if we want, or stay in the game or bet more. So if you're a gambler, you're probably like picking up on the vibe I'm saying the point. So, but other bets are big upfront investments and it will be a while before we know anything has paid off. So back to the story. So the first time I used the word bet, I said something like, "Here are a couple bets I think we should make in Q1. And so he looked at me confused, but the response wasn't the same. It wasn't negative. And you could tell he started to think. And I could tell his brain was working. And he said, he's a great leader. He said, "That's an interesting word. What do you mean? Like projects?" And this is me. "Well, sure, you could call them that, but I like to call them bets. Just to remind people that think about risk and reward and the upside. In product, we make all different kinds of bets." And very briefly, I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. Let's just call them bets." So something had clicked with him. And the important point here for our discussion today, because to be honest, the word bet might terrify people in your organization for all I know, is that words and reframing can be incredibly powerful. They can help us do this dance with uncertainty to expose people to different ideas. I have some other examples, but I thought you might have some thoughts on that, Scott.
Well, I mean, the book, I was going to say maybe he'd read the book Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. So he got,
I'm a big fan of that. Yeah.
It's a good book. No, it's no, I've got lots of thoughts, but I know you've got lots of good stuff to come.
Okay.
So you keep going. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I was just thinking, we talked about the betting beforehand, but yeah, I think we get some interesting things.
Well, what I would say is at least from my experience, is that experiment gets caught up in the, like, scientists doing some research in a back room,
right?
Kind of bucket in execs' minds.
Yeah.
And like, you want to do research? We're in business here.
Yeah.
We're not a research organization. Even talking about product discovery to people, I was having a conversation yesterday, and thinking of with one of our product managers who's talking to a CTO, experienced product person, and there's this thing around how do you say we need to do some research without saying we need to do some research, because everyone wants to get on with it, including me. as someone who lives and breathes a lot of this uncertainty in product stuff, I just want to get on with it. I don't want to do experiments. I want to get results. Like if I put my go hat on, but I think it's partly that framing. If you haven't seen it before and thought of them as bets, but
that's great. And I think what clicked with this person is that, a lot of business people really have embraced the idea of the risk, risk and so bet, probably for all I know, he's a compulsive gambler for all I know, but still it resonated because actually a lot of executives actually pride themselves on
taking calculated risks,
calculated risks. And I think your point too about the domain, I think let's get onto that. We'll talk about that later, about how just a lack of domain knowledge could impact someone's response to it. But I think that it's an interesting thing. So I think to me, like, to better dance with uncertainty, there's other things we could consider, right? So we could consider using the word, maybe opportunity instead of the word problem. So first of all, opportunity implies benefit, right? Not all problems are worth solving. An opportunity is more open-ended. If I say, oh, that's a promising opportunity, notice, I know you had Teresa Torres too on recently, so it conveys so I'm conveying a bit of risk, I'm conveying some potential reward, and I'm also conveying a sense of time, right? Opportunities exist in time. We can miss the window of an opportunity. We can be too late for an opportunity. So with just that subtle shift, right, from a problem framing, so when I'm thinking about a problem framing in terms of our uncertainty, when you think about problems related to uncertainty, the idea is if we understand the problem, we can solve it 100% if we understand it. Well, not all problems are worth solving, and we're not going to solve everything 100%. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So you can notice just that shift in framing of talking about opportunities can be like pretty powerful. And again, this is kind of like my idea is we're sort of dancing the dance when we use these words with people.
And John, the interesting thing about opportunity and about the language of bets that really comes to mind for me is a lot of what we're dealing with in uncertainty with product is not necessarily specific to product. As in, this thinking of bets, that's like a gambling approach that you can use at the poker table. And at poker, you're dealing with uncertainty. You don't know what cards are going to be dealt. You don't know what cards people are holding. You can make some guesses. But so I'm saying this thinking about uncertainty, there's a lot I think we can draw on outside of product, but we've got to package it up for product. But there's a lot for the investment community, a lot of if you're buying shares in the year 1919, or going back even further, if you look at the origins of the word carry, if you're looking at whaling fleets, they used to make a bet on the captain, and people would invest and buy shares in the people going out whaling. But you had to go is this captain any good? Are there going to be whales in the Southern Ocean? Is it going to be too
That's a
cold?
Great example.
It's not a new concept, which is something that I think we forget at our peril. However, we do need to adapt those broad philosophical concepts and apply it to product.
Yeah, and I think that for this, I mean, my thing basically is words matter, right? So even subtle things like shifting from project to mission or maybe to bet could be huge, or from problems to opportunities could be huge, or from the favorite is from requirement to operating assumptions or options. It's not a requirement. This is an assumption. It's a forecast for some future behavior, right? So when people say, well, what's the requirements for that feature? It's more well, what are our assumptions about what will happen, right? Another example is, a great one for requirement is maybe a representative option. We call it an option instead of, a requirement, or from success metric to positive signal. Success metric's an amazing one, right? Because, success metric implies actually a real chase for certainty. You say, well, what's the success metric for? But if we described it as a positive signal, then you can see how it kind of opens up the conversation. Well, a signal of what? Okay, we're making progress on these things. So I think, what I'll do is I'll tell you another story. This one was great. So I was chatting with the founder of this very rapidly growing healthcare startup. And she was a scientist, the founder, and actually one of the top scientists, the top epidemiologists in the world for her particular specialty, so epidemiology. And so epidemiology is all about risk and experimentation, as we've found out now in the sort of the COVID world. So it involves risk and experimentation in almost everything that happens. So it was very, very inspirational to talk to, by the way. So we were chatting and I asked her, so what would you work on if you were confident you'd succeed? In 2 seconds, she had this particular answer. She mentioned the specific opportunity for the business. No question, that's what I would focus on. So I was a little confused, and I thought, would focus on. So I'm thinking to myself, wait, they're not focusing on it.
On the biggest opportunity.
On the biggest opportunity that could exist.
Yeah.
And so I asked her, and her response says so much about this problem. No, we aren't focusing on it because we tried it once and it was hard, and I'm not confident we can impact that. So here's one of the foremost experts in the world on risk. To your point, you're talking about these domain things. On risk and experimentation, and one failure in product development had caused her to stop focusing on the biggest opportunity for the company, and it caused her to lose her particular confidence in it. And this is actually incredibly common. This is very common. It's much more common than we'd like to really admit as product managers. So then again, I can kind of relate to her view, right? So say you're the founder of a company working with this team of designers and developers. You've never really built a digital product. You've never seen what empowered teams can do. The team confidently tackles a problem and nothing happens. So what do you think to yourself? Well, you think they tried, it didn't work, and that's too hard. So the more I kind of learned about it, especially about her particular team, the more I started to really sympathize. So it really did fall, and this is the important point, I think, for product managers who are listening, is that it really did fall on the product manager to be better at how they tackled uncertainty. This was not the founder's fault. And here's what I mean, and here's what I think that we can learn from that, and maybe folks can learn from.
Does that mean you're now absolving founders of all?
I am absolving.
All the product manager's fault.
At the end of the day, yeah. Here's my theory on it, right? So at no point did the product manager work with the founder to detail the areas of uncertainty, to list assumptions, to list foundational beliefs. At no point did the product manager create a discovery roadmap to kind of address the areas of uncertainty. So there was really no dialogue about uncertainty. So everyone was disappointed. The founder walks away believing it was too difficult. And Scott, and this is what I was thinking about what you're saying. I think this is a really important lesson. To go back to that earlier statement, when faced with uncertainty, potentially maybe beneficial uncertainty, we kind of have these three options. We can work to reduce it before doing anything. We can do the research. We can artificially reduce uncertainty. You come up with the fake year-long roadmap. So we can put our questions to the side, just keep marching forward, just execute, team. Or we can create this structured learning process to move forward and learn. And I think that's, if you take the example of this scientific, this healthcare startup, I think that was the failing in this, because they couldn't just reduce uncertainty because it existed. So they couldn't just push it underneath the rug. So they didn't want to just march forward. They didn't want to just their research efforts had kind of hit a wall. They weren't really able to make any forward progress before they did something. And so I think what was missing was the product manager kind of presenting a structured approach. It's kind of on the product manager's shoulders to present a structured approach. So I don't know what you think there. Do you think I'm still absolving the CEO?
No. I was being a bit cheeky, but no, it's yeah, it is. I mean, that's the core. Like, to me, one of the core things with the product manager is this, like, the structure for uncertainty around how we're going to uncover what we're going to do with problems. It's really interesting to take kind of the opposite of that situation, which is where something I've seen. So I've been in that situation a lot on both sides of the fence. But I've also seen kind of the other situation, which tends to happen in bigger companies where the uncertainty is swept under the rug,
right?
In order to
that's the artificially reduced
funding up. Yeah. So in that situation, I mean, the good thing is the founders being like, we're not sure we can do it. There's all this uncertainty. What I've seen often more in bigger companies is this kind of like, well, the team, where it comes from is, hey, the team didn't seem very confident in what they were doing.
Right.
So the teams all learned to go and put forward these things as certainties that we need $10 million because we're going to go after this $1 billion market. And you're just like, this is so much risk in this. It's not being highlighted in any way, shape, or form, which is almost the extreme opposite of what you were.
And I think that's what I call like certainty theater. It's sort of, I mean, the reality, and this is why I think this is sort of a product manager superpower, because the reality is that a lot of business works on certainty theater. I mean, it does. You have your first 90 days at the company, come up with a plan at the end of your 90 days, you pitch that, you get your money, you're going to spend it the next 12 to 18 months. Before then, people forget what you originally promised. Then you'll get your extra set of money, and you've got, good 4 years of blaming other people before people figure out that you don't like have anything going on, right? So that's like a lot of large businesses, exactly how it works. But that doesn't mean we need to play the game that way, right? Like that I don't think, we want to do well in our craft. And I think what it is though, is it's also speaking the language of other people in the business, and not just, throwing up your hands one way or another and saying, well, just experiment, hang loose, or on the other hand, this is my plan, everything's buttoned down, so finding the balance between those things. And so I was thinking about, question here, what did this mean in practice? Like, what should you do at work, maybe, next week? Here's a very actionable thing. So all teams can create what I call like a learning backlog or a learning canvas. So you really develop this backlog. So you list the areas of uncertainty, maybe the decisions you need to inform, the questions you have. You prioritize that list just like you would a roadmap, right? So we prioritize where learning has the greatest value. We brainstorm how we'll learn. You can think of these as sort of learning experiments. We run those experiments. So if this is sounding familiar, this is sort of applying a normal way of thinking about product to thinking about the learning process. And I always remind people this is about putting the why before the way, which is instead of debating, should we use design thinking, or should we use lean startup, or should we use whatever, and people forget the why. Why are we learning? Is this really the most important thing? Especially designers fall into this trap where no one lets them research anything. And so they beat the drum to do research, and then they pick the effort that didn't really require them to do any research. And then people are like, oh, those researchers are just delaying things all the time to do it. So, this probably does sound familiar, because it actually resembles how we build products. You're applying that approach to learning. So let me just give an example for people. So say your biggest area of uncertainty is whether maybe new enterprise customers, I'm trying to think of a good example. So let's say new enterprise customers have, maybe you wondering whether new enterprise customers have the same needs as your startup customers. This is maybe vaguely familiar to me at Amplitude. So, whether they collaborate in similar ways. So we're trying to decide if our existing product would be okay, or whether we'll need to add new customization options. So this is a very, very common challenge for startups. So we brainstorm, we visualize our questions, and then maybe we brainstorm experiments. So maybe the first thing we might do is to analyze the collaboration patterns in the enterprise, maybe a network analysis. We run that learning experiment. And then we invite these key stakeholders to the review. Perhaps the research was inconclusive, but we tried. We discussed what we learned. And the reason why I mention this example, this practice, is using this structured approach is probably the only way you can get executives on board, because it scratches that itch that they have for structure. So if you think about there's certainly, it's approaching uncertainty with certainty. It kind of sounds like that. And so a lot of times what product does is they just kind of are very wishy-washy, and then they go back and they wonder why no one buys into them taking risks. And part of this is that those executives you work with expect some kind of process. And they're actually typically a lot more open-minded about the process if someone walks them through it. This is what we're doing, and this is why we're trying to get these results.
Well, and I think, John, as well, with the why is the really important bit.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, as you've kind of alluded to, if you've got that why, as in here's the uncertainty that we understand and we've structured it, and also the why of like, I think importantly, here's the uncertainty, but here's why we need to resolve it.
Right.
Here's the benefit of us doing this research, and resolving it will maybe unlock a revenue opportunity. That's always the winning formula.
Yeah, and that's
if we do this revenue, and the bit that kind of goes missing that I observe is everyone jumps to, like you've just said, the how, and starts debating like, and usually what I see is product manager puts forward let's do a discovery, or let's do we're going to do customer interviews. Yeah. And immediately someone finds an easy way to disagree with customer interviews. No, we don't want to talk to them. We've already done all these focus groups, and we've got this bucket of data from Amplitude with all this information. Why are we going to go talk to people? We know the answers. Yeah. And it's because, at least that I've observed, is that there's no understanding of why there's uncertainty there and what the benefit of resolving that uncertainty is.
Yeah, it's even talking about it is difficult. And that's the classic. I mean, the classic one is that, UX research, whoever goes off and researches something, and then the product executive is like, you just confirmed what we already knew. Big waste. Now, if that's crazy to me, because the question in the beginning was not about, so if I said, we have a hunch this is true, but we're actually very uncertain about that.
Yeah.
Then confirming that was true would actually be a really, really positive result. So this is just that extra little bit you can do as a product manager. Like, I disagree with that product manager's assessment of the research, but at the same time, if they had structured their discussion earlier on to open up the possibility that the research would just confirm what they knew.
And that's okay.
And it's absolutely okay.
Like, you're more certain. So you've spent less money rather than blowing. I always think as soon as you put engineers onto something, I'm a former engineer, as soon as you put them onto something, the costs go astronomically up. Yeah. A bit of research done. There's also this psychological thing of like, no code's been written, so we're all more non-committal to it. But as soon as there's 3 lines of code, even if it's just hello world, all of a sudden, no, but we've got IP invested here.
That's so funny.
There's something that Ben has thrown in the chat, and there's another question as well that we'll come back to, but that's kind of relevant, which is the scenario I'm facing is disagreement from the exec about what actually is uncertain. Yeah. And actually, it kind of ties into Saurav's question as well of like the discovery roadmap. So we'll try and answer them both specifically, but first of all, how do you try and get people on the same page of what uncertainty there is?
Yeah, and I think that this is where words always fail us until you're specific. So I have a very like pithy bit of advice for Ben when this comes up, which is basically saying, well, we don't know our users. I mean, that's like, yes, you do. Your users greater than 0%. Do you know them 100%? We never know our users 100%. So somewhere between 0% and 100% is where we know our users. And so when you say things like, well, we need to do this research, we don't know. I think that executives will always, or other people will respond very reflexively in that point. They'll reactively, and they'll just say, well, we know them more than 0%. So you're not having a discussion about uncertainty. But I think that, so there's two ways to address this. And one, we'll have to find the link. Maybe someone can find it, is someone has done this analysis of the words that we use and the amount of certainty that conveys. And so maybe someone could Google it right now and find it and put it in the link. But so look under probability words. And so one way is to actually have this conversation with the executive. It's like, do our users always do that? And then the person is like, well, yeah, I mean, no, well, I don't know. Or, are we more than equal? It's sort of these to frame it. So that is one technique, but that's a little bit of a trick. I think that the other thing to do in that situation is, often by describing the decision you're trying to make and why you're having a tough time making that decision, makes the uncertainty real for someone. So if I said, I don't even know if we should be working on this, that's the decision that we need to make because we don't know our users, is actually very different than, I'm not sure how much time we should invest in customization options because we don't know, we don't have a lot of information about how our users approach X. And so I think with Ben, like, so one way to trick that conversation is, instead of like, do we know who our users are? Because they will be right. I mean, they're greater than 0% right that your users, is to frame a specific decision that you're making that you have inconclusive information about. And often that can be enough, I think, to like get people seen. And this is why do you have to stay away from dogmatic debates about whether you should do a design sprint or whatever, because that's not real anymore. But if someone said, look, I'm a designer and I have to think about juggling the IA of this, and I have no idea where to start because I'm missing information about our user's mental model for their tasks each day. That's very different than we don't know our users. Hopefully that helps, Ben.
Yeah, that's all. So, and my kind of take on what you said is, you really want to get specific, like deep, very, very specific about the data, not kind of the general, we know our users, we don't know our users.
Right.
I mean, the interest, just something I'd throw in with Ben's one, is the interesting one for me is like, if there's disagreement, then there's inherently uncertainty, is kind of like a very uneven product argument of just like, well, if you guys are so sure, then provide the information to meet, but I guess you've got to have the specific question to be able to say,
that's why
sure, then can you take me through it all?
And that's why that a bit of advice, so I think it's like the thing is, so maybe the question to ask yourself, when you arrive at work tomorrow or whatever is really, am I providing the team that right structure to tackle uncertainty? Or am I artificially reducing it? Or am I just kind of throwing my hands up in platitudes? So that example of a learning backlog with specific questions can be helpful with that.
Now, this is like the awesome segue into Saurav's question around, you've mentioned this backlog or a discovery roadmap as an artifact to deal with uncertainty. Could you get really specific on like, what does a good one look like in your view?
A good example of what specifically?
This backlog of uncertainty learning items, like what's on that? What's on that?
Yeah, so that's a very, this is a good question, because I think, let me provide an example by providing the process to get to it as well. Because a lot of people imagine these fully formed decisions and questions right from the beginning. But what I actually do is I start with a question storming exercise. And in the question storming exercise, we embrace terrible questions. Like, we go completely off the farm, like do these people even exist? That type of question. Or like, are we even building the right thing? Or should we have released our product 5 years from now? You get people warmed up with those particular questions. And the other thing we elicit them too is observations. So people sometimes get very intimidated, like, oh, I'm not crafting this question perfectly. So an observation might be something like, wow, after this one part of the workflow, everyone seems to go all over the place. Or an observation might be like, competitor X seems to have figured out something and I'm not sure what. So
Yeah.
you start in a classic sort of design thinking way, you start very divergent with these observations. And then you work with your team at that point, so to give you an example, we've started with these very broad questions, and to Sarav's question, we then narrow it down to a question like, do these enterprise customers with more than N number of people in their organizations that are more siloed, like, do they tend to approach analysis as a cross-functional activity, or do they approach analysis as a siloed activity? Because we need to attach that to the decision of, we need to decide whether to support more cross-department workflows with analysis. I'm giving you an Amplitude example because in Amplitude, we have this very nice notebook object, which allows a lot of free-form data storytelling. And so as we go up into the enterprise, you start to get things like, I want to protect it. I don't want to publish it. I only want the people who I invite to be able to edit it. People want to have their own version of it. So I'm giving you a real world example for Sarav. So it starts out very divergent. These are siloed. We don't know what we're doing in broad questions. And then it narrows it down to a very specific question decision pair.
And it sounds iterative, that you're building in line with doing the work that you're doing. Like you maybe got to do a bit of a jump to get some of the outline there. But from what I'm hearing from you, the best way to do it, and I'm paraphrasing you, so is like iterative process to get there, but also don't stress. Like, you don't have to sit down and do 3 weeks of uncertainty planning.
Yeah, no, and this is a good point because, I mean, you have up in your head what you have up in your head, and so, the rapid elicitation of areas of questions. And so if someone's having trouble, I often say, what information could you use that would help you make better decisions tomorrow? And so some, designer will suddenly say, well, actually every day I'm struggling with this uncertainty. Sometimes the things that are bothering people and are on people's mind are happening right now. It's not just some future effort. You've got the things working right now. And
so to get kind of even more specific on this one is, where does this uncertainty log live? In Excel?
Oh geez, pick your tool, pick your poison. Notion,
doesn't matter.
Put it in whatever. I think that the main thing that's interesting there is that it's kind of like the work that makes the work work. We tend to use some system like, Jira's work, and then all the other work is invisible. It's kind of index and things. And I really encourage teams to try to make this visible, use Miro or use some kind of thing to visualize this particular thing that you're doing. And so I think that then it becomes something that you treat as work, versus just a passing phase that you're in.
And let's say we pick an item like Amplitude's kind of dilemma around notes. Do we allow enterprise to lock down notes? Like, is it worth us putting the effort in? Is that going to help us win more enterprise customers? Does it compromise the video? With that one, do you attach, like, because we're talking about opportunities, so you say we're not sure about how the best way that they're all going to work and how to make the fit. They'd be like, we're not sure if we want to do the feature, and then we're not sure how to implement the feature if we decide to do it. Do you put a do you have kind of some almost thing like, you mentioned Miro, but does it end up in some columns where there's
if you think about it this way, is the columns I use actually pretty similar to sort of, I use Popcorn. So Popcorn is like, but I change it up a little bit for questions. So in Popcorn, you have problems and observations as your P. And so you could have problems, observations, and questions. And then you have options, which would be your options to learn. And then P is potential experiment. So you start deciding what the learning experiment would look like. C is committed experiments. So you move the experiments over to committed as you run the learning activity. And then O is sort of, you move it to ongoing, which is your O, committed, ongoing. And R is review, and N is next. so you can think about your next step. So I absolutely like apply that similar type of Kanban idea to this.
How do you kind of, going back to the 6-month roadmap example?
Yeah.
and people wanting certainty over the future.
Yeah.
How do you link this with that?
Well, and this is where I think, I wrote this book for Amplitude called the North Star Framework. And I mentioned just briefly, this idea of using words like opportunities or bets or other things to be able to do this is because in my mind, if you can narrow that opportunity and pick the right resolution of that, and that the team is going to really be engaged in kind of moving that forward for a couple months or a couple quarters, example of that particular thing. That's kind of where I link this as a sub item underneath that particular thing. I mean, if you need to do this research to even think about where the opportunity is, maybe it's one level higher. But I guess the key point here is I tend to want something to sit above these learning efforts so they don't get lost in some kind of phase gate thing. Like we can't move forward at all unless and this is kind of my example of the scientist, right? Where if she didn't need research to know that was an opportunity, because she knew that was an opportunity. She needed research potentially to figure out how to structure and sequence the work to learn about that. So I think that it's really important that if, as a company, you get paralyzed into, you can't have anything on a roadmap, you can't have anything anywhere unless it sort of fits these criteria, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So you need to think about how to kind of layer these things. I don't know if that answered your question, but I probably could give a better answer there. But
no, it does help because it's not what's going through my mind is like almost jumping to solution and the how of when I've seen it done well is there's almost time and budget allocated for learning. Basically, it's like, here's some time, do some stuff that's bothering you about uncertainty to learn. And each team has time and space to do that.
And that's the funding problem with this, really. And it kind of relates to what Christina Torres will say and other people, is that if this, imagine that you will always have a learning backlog. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, there always is. It's
right.
Yeah.
Doing these things. And so this is what I meant by sort of funding the opportunity.
Yeah.
An opportunity exists, you're funding that opportunity. You might have to make numerous bets to try to exploit that opportunity or try to figure out what's happening, but you're funding that effort. And I think you're doing it right when you're not, you haven't sort of bifurcated these ideas. It's not like the work and then the learning. It just kind of fits into the general flow. And that's, Christina Torres will talk about continuous discovery, and other people will talk about different approaches to doing it. But I think that that's what she's getting at there too, where it's a continuous learning process to the point where you don't sort of fund the learning separate from the work. You fund the opportunity. And then that includes working on the work and the learning, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Again, and then the hard thing is that most people don't really fund the learning.
Right.
It's
a lot harder to get. And I think this is what a lot of design people do, is it's a lot harder to fund the learning than it is to fund an opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you say that there's this big opportunity, there's some things we don't know about it, but there's a lot of stuff we do know about it. Are we willing to fund that opportunity to do that? That's an example of we're just talking about opportunities and bets versus funding learning. I mean, that goes back to the experiment example. If I had said to that executive, do you want to fund our learning before we can even start working? The executive would say, now you're really confusing me. But if you said, do you want to fund this opportunity and there's some learning and work involved in it, you're probably more likely to get that support, is my guess.
Yeah, and I think just to round up this roadmap kind of thinking is the other one really that's coming through from what you're saying and my own experience is it's hard to put on a roadmap. It's like you can guess at timelines, but it's quite hard. You've almost got to it's less of a how long do we think our plan's going to take and more of a, given the nature and the size of the opportunity, how long can we allow ourselves to
Well, that's a huge, I was going to talk about that a little later, but I can just bump it up now to talk about it where.
Yeah. We got about 7 to 10 minutes left.
Yeah, I think this fits with this in the sense that I always use this example, which is a couple of years ago now, but I keep using it, is I remember talking to a team and they said, well, we know things are working when we spend longer on it. And so I was thinking about what they were saying, like, what do you mean, when things are working when they spend longer on it? And they said, well, we've identified an opportunity and we're just continuing to make progress on it. We haven't reached the sort of local maximum. Like we haven't reached this point where our efforts aren't having additional, rewards for doing that. And so I think that that's this shift. It comes, a roadmap that embraces uncertainty will be opportunity based. And if you do it the right way, when someone looks at that particular roadmap, you really, the response you want is you want them to say, my goodness, if we can keep pushing that one along, I'm extremely excited to keep working on that. And the best thing you can do there is to define pivot or proceed points, right? Which is the pivot and proceed point for this is like, as long as if we just seem to keep continuing to make progress with this persona or this other thing, we're going to keep going. And if we hit a wall, we're going to move on to something else to do it. And so that's an example about that I was going to mention a little later on, about incorporating the opportunity into your roadmap and embracing uncertainty in a way that the executive wants to know, are you going to manage risk? And if you don't come up with a governance model yourself that's product centric, someone will come up with it for you.
Yeah.
And they're not going to come up with one that's very product centric.
Yeah.
So, this is where I think a lot of product managers and designers who aren't very business savvy, they're very idealistic about what they're doing, but then they kind of seed these models. And the finance people and other people in the company actually just want someone to define a governance model that limits risk and does what they need to do. So I think my point there was that people are looking for a model, and it doesn't actually take that complex of a model to scratch the rest of the company's itch to let you know that you're going to keep risk under control. I don't know if that inspired anything for you, but it's
yeah. It definitely did. Just thinking of time. I just want to make sure any questions from the audience, would love to please pop them in. We've got John, are you okay for another 10 minutes?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah.
Cool.
I've outsourced picking up my son to my partner, who's going to have to go now to do that. So
no worries. If there's any questions, pop them in. John, I think while we're kind of waiting for a few questions to come through, what I would love to explore a bit. So we've gone really deep on like a framework for dealing with it, how you might budget for it. What do you do if no one's giving you the budget and you're hitting a brick wall? Aside from, go get another job, what do you do to work around it a bit? And to your point of when an executive or something hasn't seen this learning process work, what can you do to help them with that?
Yeah, the number, so, and I'm not just saying this because I work at Amplitude, because you could maybe use other products to do this too. One of the best things you can do is establish situational awareness. The executive who is new to product has never experienced something failing catastrophically, other than something not hitting a deadline or something not being they promised something and it wasn't done by that point. And that was the worst low point of their year. Right? But if you've done product before, I remember there's a Gibson Biddle talk where he talks about how they were trying to solve a problem at Netflix for 10 years. And they kept chipping away at it and tried different things and kind of move the thing. So once you've experienced something like that, you're much more likely to be circumspect, about what's happening. So it's counterintuitive, but I've found things, I do think things like design sprints and engaging people in the learning process has benefits of this, because it shows you that your intuitions are often not what you expect, right? I think combining stuff like any opportunity involved people obviously take, but I think establishing basic situational awareness is extremely helpful. And it's helpful because if things work, that's great. And if things don't work, that's great. Like if it doesn't work, it humbles people and lets them know that their wonderful ideas aren't as wonderful as they thought. And if it doesn't quite work, and if it works, it's like, wow, there's an upside here. We can really do something. So I think, and this doesn't take like advanced stats or anything. It just means like literally basic counts can be enough to make that switch go off in people's heads. So that's I think number one on what people can do. 1A, 1B. 1B is obviously involve people anytime you can with customers in the learning process so that they can see what those out. I think that the second thing is schedule, that I was going to get to later, is schedule a monthly learning review. You do not need to ask permission for anyone in your company to schedule a meeting where you're going to discuss about what you've learned about stuff you've shipped in the last quarter. No one will get fired. I doubt anyone will get fired. People might be confused or might tell you, get back to work. Get back to work. We didn't pay you to have this learning review. But that's a pretty terrible place. My guess is that no one will get you fired for that. And so start doing a structured learning review where you model the behavior of because a lot of PMs talk about, let's forget the feature factory. I want to work in all these crazy ways. But then I asked them, have you done any kind of learning review, or like, have you actually reviewed your decisions? And they say, oh, why would I do that? So they're hypocrites. And so what they need to do is that you need to walk the walk. And so no one will fire you if you do that. And so you need to start scheduling monthly learning reviews so you can kind of reflect on your decision making and what you did. And that's another good way that leaders look at that and say, wow, that person's taking it seriously. They care about my money. And I don't know if that helped.
No, that helps. And there was something else you mentioned that I'd love you to share that we were chatting about beforehand around also not everything has to be dealt with as experiments and uncertainty. Right. And there's actually a bunch of stuff in product that we actually pretty much know and should just get on with and not try and overcomplicate it. It'd be nice.
I think that shoots people. I think to this point of, it's good because we're getting my talk in the questions. But people shoot themselves in the foot all the time by using a mono process in their company where they treat all work the same way. And what you do is by doing that, you actually distract people from when you really need to use those techniques. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot better to say, look, we got, 5 tiers of work or 3 tiers of work, and they range in terms of size and complexity and uncertainty. We want a balanced portfolio because if all we did was really the crazy uncertain work, that would make people's heads explode. So we want a balanced portfolio of work. Our, more sure bets, we want to kind of run this approach on, but our really risky bets, we want to use a different approach. And if you're the C-suite, you might say to them, like, look, for our riskiest bets, we do want to check in every 2 weeks. We do want to keep people apprised of the situation. The low risk, low uncertainty bets do not require micromanagement. I'm not saying anything should require micromanagement, but the idea is if you've got a low risk type thing, that team can just march, full speed ahead on that for months and just check in occasionally. So I would say that the number one thing is come up with a common language in your company about uncertainty and the types of bets and shapes of bets you're making, and make a point of not using a mono process. That's typically a good approach for that.
Yeah. Being flexible and pragmatic in process, but that I would love to see that in in practice.
Well, it's these things don't ask for permission.
Yeah.
Stop you saying, hey, I divide up work into 3 types of work, and this actually fits in this category, and therefore I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. And an executive looks at that, and I actually have a feeling that they say, wow, that person's thinking it through half the time. You know what I mean? It's often middle management that will give you the problem because they have hung their hat on managing perceptions, and that's going to be a little bit more of a problem area than the senior leaders of the company. Actually, I think appreciate that type of language. Personally, is my experience.
Yeah, and we've got a question here, John, from Uno. You recently tweeted about the factors that dictate the role of product management in an organization. Maybe getting a bit off topic, but that's
what are the key signals we as PMs can look for from the outside to understand if a company is truly on a product-like journey? What do you think product is done so different? Geez. Okay, so much stuff.
Maybe we need another webinar for this one.
No. I think that Okay, so let's just, the factors there. So first, highest level, rapid scale up startups, and then you've got these sort of digital product first companies that are 15 plus years old, 15, 20 plus years old. So they're either public or they're private. There's some combination of things. And then you've got these digital transforming larger non-digital product companies, right? So macro level, the startups are caring about scaling up, exploring high risk tolerance. The middle tier company is thinking about scaling out and exploiting and coming up with new business models and new things like that. The digitally disrupted companies are thinking about scaling down. They actually have to descale their efforts. They have to think about how to work more nimbly, and they tend to have a bias towards conservation, the status quo. And so the only reason I'm using this very simple model, Uno, to say is that, like, first, just understand the business reality of that company, because those macro forces explain a lot of the role of product in particular companies. And we can ascribe to personality, and we can say this leader's great or that leader's great or whatever. But, the reality is that startups are chaotic environments, and that may or may not be a place that you want to work at. The digital product first companies on their second or third or fourth act often have a trouble with hubris. Everyone, they were successful, and that's their problem. It's how to be successful with something new. So that's a different product. Some people love those environments. They love I've got a big existing company, Microsoft, and I'm going to launch this new product for them that's going to be more product centric or whatever. And then frankly, some people, I have friends who are interested in healthcare and in government and other things, and even in banking, and they really relish the idea of helping this larger mission-driven, let's take even something like an IKEA or like a big, very mission-driven company, and thinking about helping it become, embrace digital product ideas. So Uno, the first thing is, those are the big factors that you can look from the outside, because that will explain a lot of the dynamics that you see in the particular companies. Hopefully that helped. It's a big question.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, John. Cool. Well, cool. I guess I'll give you the final kind of, is there any kind of last point that you want to make on summing up on uncertainty in product? Because we've run
I would just say that, I would say to folks that this is certainly something I've struggled with in my career. And I would jump to the idea that they're a little bit what we just spoke about, whereas find these areas where you don't really need to ask for permission, but have empathy for the other side, in the sense that they might be incredibly skilled business people, but if you don't have the tacit knowledge of doing product and design, you don't know the intricacies of these things. And so we just sound like a very dogmatic broken record and talking about Marty Kagan or whatever. And it doesn't really register with them. So I would leave people with that idea that, like, it's kind of on you to be an ambassador of the craft of what you're doing. And I know it's really hard to say that, but in general, there are always opportunities to use your language and how you approach to communicating this to get more people to support you. I hate to say it for the people who are like want to blame their organization for everything, but there really are opportunities here to become a better leader, a better product leader, et cetera.
And I think if you peel it back, it ultimately, like every business in some way, shape or form, I like the bet language, it's what's used in investment. Companies have been thinking for a while. And
this is not like it's not new to think about risk. They just haven't, I tweeted today that, you could, my partner works at a shoe company. Hun, talk me to your shoe designers. Oh, they're crazy geniuses. They're just kind of working up there. We don't bother them. Talk to me about IT. Oh, they're under these strict, deadlines, and they have a year advance of these things. And it was just funny. It's just like, that's a classic. It's not like the business doesn't understand creativity or doesn't understand design or taking risks. They understand that they're taking, Zara, the clothing company, can get clothes to market on the streets of Europe in 6 weeks or less in small batches to test their clothes.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So anytime, but if you said to Zara's, I bet if you said to Zara's kind of like IT department or however they even call it, they probably don't call it product. They probably just call it IT or call it whoever. They're probably asking for a year-long roadmap. So again, it's not that your company doesn't understand risk. It's just they haven't applied to understanding it for product yet. And this is where you can be an ambassador, is the way that I put it.
Find the language. Awesome. Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for
my pleasure.
Chatting with us on behalf of myself and everyone in the audience. Really appreciate it. And to everyone in the audience, the webinar recording will go out. We'll send there's that link on perception of probability that Ben's helped us with. Thank you so much, Ben.
Cool.
We'll get that out. And of course, there's going to be more of these coming up. You can follow John on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, all that fun stuff. But really looking forward to chatting with you again. Thanks again so much, John.
Sure. My pleasure. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome.